emotional management is a skill that you for sure can develop. And for me, being consistent was a value that I had that I've seen, the players I emulated.
All right, I'm here with the one and only Billy Allen. Billy, thanks so much for being here.
Aaron, thanks for having me. I hope this goes well.
Billy, you're a two-time AVP Tour champion. You're an author of 3 books. You're a podcast co-host of Coach Your Brains Out. And you're a husband and father, and your Instagram is @BillyCatchAllen. Again, Billy, thanks so much for being here, bro.
Yeah, when you put that all together, it actually sounds pretty good.
For sure. So, Billy, let's just jump right into it. What does living an inspired life mean to you?
Inspired life, I would say it's spending your day doing what's meaningful to you. I think, cutting out maybe some of the clutter and some of the maybe expectations of what society or people tell you to do, and just doing really diving into what you want to be doing. And I think that's, different for everybody. For me, that's not like a leisure thing where you're kind of just hanging out. It's really challenging yourself and improving at, what's important to you.
Yeah, no, I love that so much. And just watching you and competing against you over the years, you've always had this kind of way to just do you. I think that's part of, staying inspired too. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think, it's easy once you have an identity to kind of, it's a lot easier to like be, if you're clear on who you are and your values, to be that, right. And to be consistent and to, stand out a little bit. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I've not given in that much to peer pressure. So I think it's been a lot easier to be, do what's important to me and have my own values when other people might say like, it's a waste of time, or, why don't you do this? It's just, yeah, it's just been part of who I am and I've embraced it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to jump right into mindset because mindset is a big part of this project. This project is about tools for inspired living, and before the show, I was telling you this is supposed to be or kind of geared towards the youth athlete, but it's kind of evolved into anyone who resonates with that message. Really, could you talk about mindset in terms of champion mindset? Since you're a champion, what does champion mindset mean to you?
Um, I would say it's just about being your best. It's a like, how do you reach your full potential? And for me, that comes to just really focusing on improving and not proving yourself, right? It's not just trying to show, hey, I'm good. It's taking risks and looking bad and just really focusing on just growth. And for me, that's not a steady line. If you can tell from you said I had 2 AVP wins, and that's over a very, very, very long career. Um, but I think, every year I get better, and that's what's important to me.
Yeah, no, I love that mindset of just constant improvement. Let's specifically talk about winning for a second. How does the champion mindset, reflect in those 2 wins? I know you've had more wins too over the years, but just those 2 specific AVP wins. How does the champion mindset, kind of reflect in those wins?
I would say what stood out for those wins, I mean, other than just I was a better player at that point in my career, is just full commitment to, for me, beach volleyball, where I'd say the beginning of my career, it was a little bit of like, testing the waters. And then by the time I was, at the point where I was getting to finals, it was just, I was fully committed. That was my identity. I was a professional volleyball player. And so, my day revolved around that. I took risks. I, had coaches. I paid to travel all over. It had a lot to do with preparation. As a, if you're just starting out on tour, you're competing against guys that full-time job, and you're such a disadvantage because of that. And so once you kind of just train like you are a pro, it becomes a lot easier, and just have that mindset of, this is who I am. This is what it's going to take to be my best and to be fully committed. So like, going into those tournaments, you've learned a lot more from experience, but at the same time, you're committed to doing all the little things, like you're, preparing, you're scouting, you've, practiced hard, you're in shape, like just all that stuff. I would just say is just full commitment to the task.
I've actually played against you in a final. I don't know if you remember. It was a long time ago. It was a co-ed final. You and Janelle
Oh
got
boy.
Yeah, you beat me and Natalie, Natalie Paredes. Do you remember that Manhattan?
Was that Manhattan? I
It
know.
was Manhattan.
I don't remember that specific. I know like Janelle and I have played in a lot of co-ed, and so I would credit her as probably the what took us over the edge. But co-ed's a lot of fun, and it's got its own challenges. But yeah, we make a good team. That was yeah, I picked a good partner.
Yeah, no, you guys were dominant in the co-ed scene, but I just remember playing. For me, it was a cool moment because we're near the same age, but you're like
Mm.
incredibly talented as an athlete, way better than me. But I remember being in the finals against you guys, and I remember this look in your eye, like we're gonna win. It was like that look, like I got
Mm.
this, and it was like this confidence. And you know, I actually played against you too another time in what was it, Hermosa? It was the Hermosa. What was it? The Cuervo, I think it was. You and Matt Prosser against me and Matt Hilling. Do you remember that one?
I remember that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a gnarly game. It was like really tight, right?
Yeah, we went 3, and that was big for me
Hmm.
because I was like, all right, got a
Hmm.
game off him. You ended up winning the match, but again, same thing. I could tell from you. You have this even keeled approach to just staying calm in the pocket. And again, going back to what I said before, just being yourself. Could you kind of tie all those things into that champion mindset that we're talking about?
Yeah, I haven't thought about it that much, but I have heard that before. I know my parents would say the same thing, like playing soccer as a kid. I'd be goofy with the rest of the kids, but then there'd be maybe a certain time where I would just kind of get to another level, or like the focus would kick in. And yeah, I think I felt that playing on the AVP too. For me, it's I'm. You've seen Avengers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you know how the Hulk is like, my secret is I'm always angry.
You
I
okay?
feel like I'm always nervous, and so I'm just used to it by now. So, in those matches, I'm just like, I don't feel like I have I don't feel like I come in with this so much confidence that I'm going to beat you or that kind of thing. But like, as the game progresses and you settle down, um, you know, then it's just become, at a certain point it becomes volleyball, and it's not like, oh, I'm in this, a final, or oh, I'm in this AVP, or it has this other gravitas to it. It's just, eventually you're just playing volleyball. And I think that's when I settled in and just really get present with, hey, we're just competing. This is the same as if I'm playing co-ed, as if I'm playing on the AVP. And then it becomes fun and you're really present and you're just playing volleyball. I think that's the time where maybe the pressure comes off and what confidence I have comes back. And yeah, just trying to just focus on winning.
Man, I love that. I was always impressed how even keeled you were, and you just never really overreacted, and just so like emotionally stable. I actually wanted to jump into that emotional management stuff. Like, where does that come from, and how do you sustain that? And if you can provide any tips or tools for people out there who might be listening, who need help with that emotional management.
Sure, I'm sure a big part of it is personality, right? Like if I was Casey Patterson, I'm sure it'd be a lot different. But this is just who I am, so I'm sure a big part of it is personality. But I will say that, I mean, emotional management is a skill that you for sure can develop. And for me, being consistent was a value that I had, that I've seen. The players I emulated were like that, and they weren't super hot and cold, and so I saw it as a something to strive for. And so I think both personality and like a skill to work on, that's the kind of player I wanted to be. Um, I would say maybe some things that help are really focusing on what you can control. And there are so many elements, especially on the beach, when they have, obviously the heat and the wind and a lot of other factors that go into it, that are just so outside your control. And if you get caught up in the emotions of that, that's such wasted energy, because one, both sides of the court have to deal with it. But then two, it doesn't help you. And so it's just really focusing on what you can control, what really matters. And another thing is, I would say, in beach volleyball, it's you and a partner. And so it's a very small squad you have to really focus on. And so anything outside of that zone, outside of the court, outside of connecting with my partner, is kind of irrelevant, right? The crowd, the tournament, all that kind of stuff. And so you could be getting heckled, you could be having all kinds of triggers that might want to spark emotion. Um, but again, it's just like, how is that serving you? And some players get really like feed off of that. For me, it's always been just like focus on my task, focus on my partner. Like we're in this together. Let's just grind, and not so much the highs and lows of all those external things outside of my control.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of like just staying unconditional, right? Where the conditions don't
Mm.
really matter. You're just doing yourself, you're just being yourself. I love that. And can you talk a little bit about self-talk? I know on your podcast, Coach Your Brains Out, you guys talk to so many people, so many incredible people that value really good self-talk, right? How does that help you on the court, and what have you learned about self-talk over the years?
Yeah, something I've learned about self-talk and just the whole idea of like mindfulness and emotions and stuff is that they're really hard to control. We have a sports psych we work with at USA Volleyball. It says like, the brain is a thought and feeling, factory. It just produces them whether you want to or not. And actually, this pandemic, we did without volleyball. I kind of jumped in with him and did a lot more mindfulness training, is what he does. It and a lot of group mindfulness. But the
Could
idea
you
is, I thought, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Could you like go into mindfulness training? Because I
Yeah,
Dr. Mike Gervais talked to me about that a little bit, but I'd love to hear more from you.
yeah. I don't have a huge background with meditation and that stuff. I thought, you sit on the floor by yourself quietly for 10 minutes, and you were somehow going to be better at volleyball. But that wasn't my experience. And this is so he runs. His name's Peter Haberl, and he does a bunch of sports through the U.S. Olympic Committee. And it was group mindfulness. So he would have athletes from wrestling and swimming and for whatever beach volleyball. Although I think I was the only one that ever did it. Get together and it's a group. So mindfulness is just like awareness of what you're thinking and feeling. Okay. And we do group mindfulness sessions, which is for me way better than just like quiet meditation. So like if you and I were doing it together, there's like, we did like tons of different practices. So they're all different, but a lot of them were social noting. So you note out loud. You're still like breathing and closing your eyes, but whatever the prompt is, you're noting stuff out loud. And it just really helped me to the idea of like just when you have something to concentrate on, because you're just really you have to like, let's say if you're just like naming whatever thoughts or feelings you're having at that moment, um but naming it out loud and even hearing you name it, it just really brings you back to the present and your mind doesn't wander as much. And then it's interesting, like if we were sitting here naming, you know nervousness, anxiety, excitement, like whatever that comes to you on your turn, the thoughts and feelings change like so rapidly. So like 1 second you're nervous or you're like anticipating something, the next minute you're grateful, and so just how that transfers to me to volleyball is whatever thoughts and feelings you have, if they're negative or whatever, they're fleeting, right? They don't stay. Like there's not a match is a lot happens in a match. It's not like you're anxious for 45 minutes of a match. You have times where you're joyful, you have times where you're this, all that stuff kind of comes and goes. And so for me, just knowing that if I have this sense of, if we tie back to self-talk, I can't control my initial outburst of what comes in my head. So I might look even keel, but if I make a mistake, I'm like in my head yelling at myself. And for me, like I thought I'd be able to just, oh, once I do this, I'll be bulletproof. I'll be perfect, and everything will be, my self-talk will be great. And I'll be such a nice guy to myself. But what I learned is that initial outburst is an emotion is kind of a little bit out of my control. It's just going to come. But then where do I go from there is under my control. So I get blocked by Aaron Wexler and I'm kicking myself. And that's my first reaction, but I don't have to stay in that thing. My next self-talk could be like, okay, let's focus on the next task at hand. Let's go from there. And before, if I had those negative thoughts or lack of confidence, I'd be like, oh, I'm doing it. Like I'm not mentally strong because I'm happy. But what I've learned is that those kind of things, at least for me, are pretty inevitable. And it's more important the actions you take and where do you go from there. So just to give you an example on the self-talk, I would say it's a lot easier if you're filling your head with like positive things, and it's a lot um, easier. It makes less room for negative thoughts to come in, right? Because you're already just thinking like, oh, I got this. Let's be aggressive. I'm going after this ball. It just, doesn't permit any room for negative thoughts. But the one thing that I've probably stressed the most is we have a mindfulness practice called just sitting, and it's super simple. All you're doing is noting just sitting, and you just kind of say that over and over when you feel moved. And sometimes it could be aspirational, like, "Hey, my mind's wandering," so I'm just reminding myself, "Hey, just sitting. That's like all you have to do right now." And other times it's just noting, like awareness. This is what I'm doing right now, just sitting. And how I transfer that to volleyball and self talk is it's become the mantra is just playing. And so whenever I feel nervous, whenever I feel tension, I just have that self talk, just playing, just playing. And it kind of brings me back to like, just focusing on the next thing. All I gotta do is pass the ball and play volleyball. Don't worry about how much money I'm gonna lose on this trip to Germany, or how embarrassing it's gonna be when Wexler blocks me again. It's just, hey, just playing. So that'd be like the practical self talk tool that I've incorporate now.
Man, I love that. I really love that because that's really training the subconscious, right? As you're going through your skill sets and you're just training your subconscious to just stay in the moment. Just play. Just play. I love that a lot.
Mhm.
That's really good. Do you use affirmations at all? Like, do you listen to affirmations?
Not as much as I should probably. I think, yeah, I'm not. What would be example? Like, I got
Like,
this. I'm a winner.
yeah, stuff like that. I mean, I really like affirmations. Like just
Mm,
typing in positive affirmations on YouTube or like there's a lot of money things on there, but like
mhm.
I like listening to that stuff constantly, so it just kind of gets in my head. It just makes me feel more calm and happy. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I would say, like I said, I think if you're filling your head with that, you're leaving a little less room for negative stuff, and that can only
right.
help you. For me personally, I think during the game, I'm thinking a lot more specific to my tasks. So maybe it's, um, see the server if I'm going to back to pass. I think the idea is just like to be present is to anchor your attention to something. And if it's like serve receive, and all of a sudden I'm just like, see the ball or see the server, like getting ready to pass, just really be, have my attention focused on that, my next job. That's what helps me the most in crunch time.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I think that's a really good segue to flow. I've been asking most of my guests about the idea of flow and what you're talking about here, this mindful self-talk, this mindful kind of way of playing, just play. That's kind of almost getting to the flow. I'm wondering for you, can you identify when you're in the game in the flow or in the zone?
Yeah, I would say I've played so many matches, and I can think of a handful where felt like full, in the flow state. And I'm sure there's times where you're playing well and you're just lost in it, but the times that stand out, I guess, would be when it is prolonged. Right? So like there's moments in every game, I'm sure, where you're making good plays and you're not worried about the score and you're fully present. But the times where it extends, especially in volleyball where you have so many interruptions and like in between points, you have time to stop and think. Um, it'd be harder to kind of to be in flow. Or if you're like writing or doing something where you're kind of just totally lost in the thing, I think I could see that lasting longer. But I do have a few matches. I played in probably the best match I've ever played, was in San Francisco. I don't know what the year was, maybe 2017. Stafford and I were in the final. We lost in McKibbin's, sorry, Madison McKibbin, Ty Loomis. But in the semi, we played Reed Pretty and Ricardo. And Stafford strained his ab in the second game. We'd won the first. And the second game, he got hurt and we lost that game. And then the third game, he was like half jumping. We ended up split blocking. It was just really bad. I think uh we were down big. I know at the end it was like 14-9 or something. Back when they did the free score.
Mhm.
But it like that, like from then on, we ended up coming back and winning the match. And I was hitting on two, which is something I like never do. We were split blocking. I never block. I was jump serving. I kind of just doing everything I could. And it was like after the game, like during the game, I would say that's like the most I felt in flow, where the score didn't matter because we had nothing to lose. Like we were going to lose the match anyways. And I was just so concerned on like, what do I have to do to win this next point? What do I have to do to win? And I remember like even watching it, I wasn't celebrating. because we were making good plays, it was just like on to the next job, right? I would go to the next and be ready to block. I would just like everything else was, I had no idea what the score was because I felt like insurmountable. It was just like, how can I win this next point? And that's what I felt like the most lost in a game. And I remember when the game ended, I was like shaking still, like when I was like hugging my wife and going back to the player's tent, and this feeling of like, yeah, just playing at a level that I hadn't, maybe played before for that long of a time. And I think for me, flow just comes with being present, and anything that robs your attention away from the present, whether that's, you know, expectations, the crowd, worry, thoughts about winning, like it could be good things too, right? Like you're like, hey, we're about to win this tournament. Like I think that just takes you out of that present moment, and that takes you away from flow, and how you play your best.
Mm, wow. Um, can you practice being in the flow, or does it just kind of come?
Yeah, I wonder if it's one of those things where if the harder you grasp for it, the less you can reach it. But I would say, I mean, like flow specifically, but I would say that you can practice being present for sure.
Right.
And I think that that's maybe, what leads to it. Um, and I think in games you have those moments where like it's the end of the game and you're like, shoot, if we know all you do is sight out here and we'll win, and then everybody will love me and I'll be so good and stuff like that. And you just gotta like squash those feelings and be like, no, 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 don't get ahead of yourself. Like go back to the moment. I think if you can, that's something you can actually practice and practice a lot. So much in practice we're focused on technique and getting better at certain skills. But I think just as much time should be contributed, if not more, especially leading up to tournaments, of just being in that, we call it like the trusting mindset rather than the training mindset, where you're like going through the mental stuff of what you're going to be doing in a game. And in the training mindset, you're like developing new skills, right? And trying new things and letting skills in. And the trusting mindset is you're letting skills out and you're actually just like playing with what you have. And so during practice, if I find myself worried about technique or form, it's like, hey, that's not the time for this. That was the beginning of practice. Now it's just like, how do I win this point? How do I stay present? And just really, yeah, focus on keeping your mind in that competing mode. And I think that'll help transfer to tournaments, because if you're always just training like practice is practice, all of a sudden you have to turn it on in games. But if you're really practicing that trusting mindset during practice, then you've been preparing the right way.
Man, I love that. I think I think that trusting mindset is a huge part of champion mindset, right? I
Mhm.
mean, because I think that's just something that not a lot of people have, but a lot of champions kind of innately have that. But I totally think it's something that you can develop, right? Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. I think you get better at what you spend your time doing, and
Yeah,
if you spend your time, um, if you want to call it the championship mindset in practice, like that's how you develop it.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and for me, again, it's not like I don't want to be in the Manhattan Open final worried about my platform.
right,
you know, I want
right.
to be, yeah, just trusting that I have the skills and just to let them out and be an athlete and play my best.
I love it. Billy, I want to transition to talk about your podcast, Coach Your Brains Out. And, a big part of your podcast your podcast, you with John Mayer and Nils and Andrew Fuller, right?
Hmm, hmm.
Yeah. So you guys have really inspired me when it comes to my podcast. I was hoping you could just kind of talk about anything that comes to mind when it comes to like learning lessons that you may have, but you can maybe grasp from your memory right now. Like, and before you answer, anyone listening out there, to do a podcast, number one, it's a lot of work, but number two, it like opens up your world of curiosity and imagination when you get to talk to so many incredible people, and you learn a lot. And I want to get into that right now. What lessons come up for you for the podcast?
Yeah, we've done so many. I would say some of the things that people repeat that are similar, that keep coming up. We talked to a lot of coaches, but I think it translates to anything. Is culture, the importance of culture, and relationships. On the
Sorry,
culture front, I mean, like a coaching volleyball. Sorry,
Sorry,
cut out.
yeah, cut out. Start that over again. Yeah,
Yeah,
just talk about the learning lessons maybe that you learned from the podcast.
yeah. When we started a volleyball coaching podcast, I thought it would be a lot of like X's and O's, and hey, here's how you do a serving drill and stuff like that. But I would say some of the big refrains that almost everybody talks about would be culture and relationships. And I think that can be, whether you're a coach or not, that can be applied to so many things. On the culture side, it just seems like when you're clear about your mission and you have everybody on board, it just becomes like such a more productive environment. And it seems like the coaches that have a really strong, clear picture of their culture, um, I think just all your decisions get easier, right? From the macro level decisions on who do we hire to like, oh, how do we take care of our equipment? Like everything just becomes way easier when you have a strong culture that's defined, and the players, the coaching staff, everybody's just really on board with that, and everybody's rowing in the same direction. Um, and I think, I mean, if the coaches we talk to too, it's not like it's a static thing, like, oh, this is my culture, and then like, let's go from there. It changes every year. You're always growing and adapting. But at the macro level, they're really clear on who they want to be and their team's values, and that kind of like leads the ship.
So cool, man. It's funny because I wrote down three things that I learned from listening to your podcast, and they were very close to what you said. For me, it was curiosity,
Mm,
increasing curiosity, right? Tools and relationships.
mm,
So, but I love what you said about culture, because culture is everything, right? You like even the culture that I'm setting up here on this podcast. It's a culture of exploration and curiosity, and inspiration. There's two podcast episodes from your podcast that stuck out to me, and I was wondering if you could maybe talk about those. The one that I really liked and I actually listened to twice was the Resiliency one with Trevor Reagan.
mm-hmm.
You remember that one?
Yeah.
Man, like that was so cool. He talks about learning and then like zooming, framing, and maintaining growth mindset. Um, could you expand on any of that stuff?
Yeah. And resiliency for me is like one of my core values too, and not because like I'm good at it, but just because I think it's so important. And there's a couple things that working with our sports psych Peter, it's like, hey, it all comes back to your values and what's important to you, and that's kind of what you rely on. And you look at everything through that lens. Like in this practice, am I being resilient, right? And or am I like, you know whining or something? Or if how do we just had this loss, like am I being resilient? Am I going back after it? My thoughts on resiliency is we also had a skater, Paul Rodriguez, on, and his line that stuck with me was, it's all about the bounce back. And
Mm.
just that idea, like, you're gonna fail so much. I mean, unless you're Phil Dalhouser, you're not winning like every tournament. And obviously he isn't either. So like so much of it is setbacks and frustrations, and you lose partners, and all these things happen, you get injured, but it's all about like just being resilient and going back after it and just continuing to push forward. And again, I think the best players are the ones that just recover fast, and they don't, like, there were so many better players than me in college that went out to play beach. And I think I just like outlasted them and stuck with it longer. So
Yeah, for
yeah, no,
sure.
I think resilience is huge, especially like for younger players, when you don't have the consistency yet. Like just keep getting out there, keep playing tournaments, and keep improving.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, being resilient, I think, goes back to champion mindset, right? Like you don't let anything derail you, you're focused on your path. I was hoping you could maybe get into a little bit more of that idea of framing. I just really liked how Trevor talked about that because, framing is everything, specifically for champions, right? We just frame things that kind of help us, right? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, remind me. I don't remember that
Well, framing,
specifically.
yeah, the way he was talking about it was like, you just frame things that happen in your life. Okay, so let's say someone cuts you off in traffic. Well,
Mhm.
maybe, instead of getting pissed off, well, maybe that actually benefits you because
Mm.
you had to stop at this stoplight and then things shifted in your day and maybe I don't know, like I'm rambling a little bit, but like using a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
situation, yeah,
No, no,
using a
no.
situation and framing it to a positive for your benefit.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it comes, have you read that book, The Obstacle is the Way?
No, I haven't.
Well, even just the title, like The Obstacle is the Way, like you're framing this challenge, this obstacle as the way through. And to give
Mm,
you a picture of what that looks like, let's say you have, um, let's say there's a gap or a hole in the road, and you also have this like giant boulder in front of you, and it's like, dude, I have all these obstacles. But then, like, if you get the boulder into the hole, that kind of like becomes the path across, because it, like, creates
There
a
you go.
bridge.
Right, right.
um but yeah, just the idea of like framing these challenges as actually opportunities to get better. And it can be something as small as, hey, like we have, I remember the USA national team was talking about this, that one of their code, like, keywords was adversity and embracing adversity, right? And so, like, because they're like their showers didn't have any hot water at whatever tournament they're at, or whatever, their ride to the hotel was, way longer than they thought. They were just like saying, adversity, adversity, this is going to make us stronger, because we could take that stuff. um
Cool.
for me, I think, yeah, like there's always an opportunity. You don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? So you get dumped by a partner, and you can either frame that as like, oh, I suck, he doesn't think I'm very good, I don't have a partner now, I don't have any points, I'm like out of the main draw. Or you look at, hey, like, this is opening the door for my next partner, like we're going to create something great, and this, I have
Right.
a fresh start. And so, yeah, for sure, it's how you frame stuff. And I also think, for me, gratitude becomes a key component to that. Like, so we travel for the FIVB, like, all around the world. And when you're in it, it's like you're so focused on all the little inconveniences, right? Like, oh, we have like a layover here, like, oh, I'm stuck, doing this. But from the outside, you have to remember, perspective wise and how you frame it, there are so many volleyball players that want to be doing what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and only a certain amount of players are able to travel. And so
Right.
when you're complaining that you have to go all the way to China for a tournament, when there's like like literally hundreds of volleyball, thousands of volleyball players that would love to pay money to go to China to play beach volleyball, it just becomes silly when you look at it like that. And you just really have to be grateful. And so for me, framing stuff, um, that, like, hey, like, step back, what I'm doing is really cool, and it is a gift. And whatever small inconvenience I find in the big picture is like just so trivial, and I should be grateful. I was in New York for an AVP, and I got there like early, and I'm thinking like, oh man, like, New York hotels are so expensive and blah blah blah. And I went down to the site to practice, like before the qualifier started, and the workers are still building the stadium, and there's like dozens of people sweating in the sun, like setting up these viewing stands that people are going to pay money to come like watch us play. And it just gave me so much perspective, and just be grateful, like, how much work it goes in that I don't even know about to make what I do possible. And yeah, I think that was just a way to frame it, and just be grateful.
Man, that's so great to hear from you. Like, going back to like my podcast and what I've been learning, and like a recurring theme is that gratitude, right? Like, people who live their versions of an inspired life, whatever that may mean to them, that gratitude is like the number one thing, man. Like, if you just have that, like, just intrinsically, it's just part of who you are. I mean, just things open up, and you can frame things however you want, I feel like. Um, yeah, that's great, Billy. There was another episode I wanted to mention, the Chop Wood Carry Water episode,
Mm,
with Joshua Medcalf. The main message on that one was surrendering the outcome. And I
mm.
think that ties back into what we've been talking about, this champion mindset, the staying in the present. Yes, we want to win, we're focused on winning, but at the same time, we surrender to the outcome. Could you expand on that a little?
Yeah, I would say the outcome, especially in sports, is out of your control, right? Like, I could play my best, and we just play a team that's better, or a team that gets breaks, or like, what I mean, you can influence the outcome, but at the end of the day, you can't control, like, hey, I tried super hard, so we won the tournament. Like, it's that's out of your control. What you can control is, I would say, two things: your process and your character. And I think the character kind of feeds into the process, right? Like, if as a person, like, I value um, grit and hard work, right? That's gonna affect my process, and I'm gonna, like, be practicing and training and lifting when I don't want to, when I'm sore, when I have something I don't see. um and I think, surrender the outcome, like, hey, like, it's out of my hands, and I just dive into the process of preparing and getting better and growing. And it really frees you to compete at your best, because, again, it's out of your hands, you've already surrendered the outcome, all you can do is just give it your all and be satisfied with that, and play without regrets.
Mm. Man, I love that. I think that's champion mindset right there. I think that all this stuff has been champion mindset. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about writing. Let's talk about your books. There's one of them right there.
Yeah.
Coach Your Brains Out. I'm going to hold this up right here because this is a great book. And before the show, we were talking about this book as a really great tool for anyone in leadership, specifically coaching sports, but really it's a good tool for leadership. Could you talk a little bit about your process writing this book, where the inspiration came from, and yeah, anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, well, it's nice to hear you say that because one of the books that John and I look to a lot is called Heads Up Baseball, and it's not a volleyball book, right? But it's probably the best like sports specific book that I've read. And so we wanted our book and our podcast to be the same way, where maybe it uses volleyball as a metaphor, and maybe some of the specifics are volleyball, but it could be used and taken for for different things, parenting, for sports, for all that stuff. Um, as far as how the book came out, we've been doing the podcast for a few years, and like you said, you just if you have this treasure trove of lessons that you've learned, and you're like, hey, we got to like, for our own benefit as well as for others, like write some of this stuff down.
Mhm.
And John and I were on a trip up to San Luis Obispo to visit our friend Brady, and I kind of, on the car ride over with Janelle, I wrote down like an outline and just basically like kind of how the chapters ended up coming. Like, hey, we have an introduction, then we talk about mindset, you know, feedback, practice, competition, game, like all like things that ended up being the chapters. And then I said, hey John, this is the outline. Would you want to like dive into this and do a book? And he was like all fired up, like let's do it. And I'd already written one fiction book, so I kind of knew how the process worked as far as formatting and publishing and self-publishing and that stuff, getting a cover design. And basically I gave John all the hard chapters and I wrote all the easy chapters. And then, and then we just had a Google Doc where we kept like giving notes and swapping back and forth. And like I'd rework his stuff and he'd change all my mistakes and stuff like that.
Oh, it's awesome. My main takeaways, and shout out to John Mayer. I just recently had him on the podcast as well. Um, my main takeaways from the book, I loved how you talk about, identifying coaching philosophy. I love how
Mm.
you talk about teaching in keys. That's what I do. I come up with keywords, but those keys are so important, I feel like, for learning. And then leadership, and then I love how you say giving rather than taking control. Could you talk about that for a second? For any coaches listening, I feel like a lot of coaches love that control, right? This is my
Mm.
program. This is my team. This is I used to be kind of like that as a coach, but I love the giving as opposed to that taking control. Talk about that for a second.
As a coach, I think it's hard to remember sometimes that it's not all about you,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
you're making so many decisions and so much falls on you as far as responsibility, but really it's, it depends on the level, I'm sure a little bit, but it's about the players and their experience and them getting better and stuff like that. And what we've learned is, just like you said, talking about relationships too, is that when players are involved in their growth and they have autonomy over certain things, like as humans we crave autonomy, and when they're involved, like they are willing to do so much more. Because it's not like you as this general dictating to your pawns, hey, do this. um you're saying like, hey, like let's get better, like how do you think we can get better, what do you need to work on today, how can we like achieve this, and you get them on the same page. It just goes a long way. And that could be subtle, right? It doesn't have to be like, if sometimes when you hear that, you think, oh, I have to, as a coach, I have to let this like 12-year-old girl decide our practice. Like, no, but you can maybe give them options, right? And you could say, hey, you guys want to do queen of the court at this point, or do you want to go back to like this wash drill? I mean, little things like that, when they get invested in it and they feel like they have some choices, goes a long way into them buying into the program.
Yeah.
And then I would say at the pro level, like John Mayer's probably a few months younger than me, and he's my coach. And so it's an interesting dynamic, right? To be, because we're more like peers than it is this like figure that's like ahead of me that I'm like, whatever. But so become collaborative, right? And it's like, hey, this is what I see. What do you guys see? And it's like a back and forth, and it feels like, yeah, just we're working together rather than I'm like, he's my boss.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I really like the idea of asking questions to players too,
Mhm,
like, what do you think about this? Or what would you like to do? I think that really sparks the curiosity and the leadership in them, right? Um, yeah, I just think good leaders create other good leaders.
mhm. Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then as far as asking questions, like, we remember way better when we actually have to think about it and give an answer and, like, analyze, like, "Oh, what did I do on that play?" Rather than just be told, like, "Hey, bend your knees."
Right. Right, right. Well, yeah, just one more time on that podcast. It's called Coach Your Brains Out. And the book is called Coach Your Brains Out as well. And then I also wanted to mention to your two other writing pieces, Good Blood and Dark Blood. Why don't you talk about those for a second?
Yeah, so a passion of mine has always been storytelling. Grew up, I had a comic book company I ran with my brothers and a cousin, and then in college, I made a feature length action movie with the Northridge men's volleyball team and a couple other sports teams. And after college, I did I was part of a site called Kinda Good, where we made
Mhm.
Danny Kinda videos.
That's right.
So I've always been involved creatively in that kind of stuff. And then uh, books are just way better because it's all up to you. I don't need to like bug my friends into showing up on set and or doing stuff, right? I can just sit in my room and write myself. So, anyways, I wrote two fiction books. The second one, Dark Blood, just came out this past December, and they're fantasy adventures. They have nothing to do with volleyball. Well, there's some motor learning stuff in there, but it's just, it's hidden behind a bunch of swords and stuff. But yeah, they're fun, and if you want a good story, I'd recommend checking them out.
Yeah, that's so cool. How can we find those books? Are they on Amazon or?
Yeah, they're on Amazon. That's the easiest way to get them. Just search Billy Allen or Good Blood Dark Blood. I have a website called billyketchallen.com that has, I guess, more information too.
Cool. I'll link all that stuff on this. In terms of writing, Billy, like, could you give any tips to anyone out there, including myself, who's a aspiring author, but maybe is struggling with the writing process? Because, man, I'll tell you, I give it up for writers and authors. This is not an easy process, you know?
I would just say, know that it's not easy for anybody, right? So it's not like the guy's written 10 books and all of a sudden he just like sits down and like crushes it, right? Yeah, it's a struggle for everybody, and you just keep revising and keep working on it. Um, I'd say some things that might help is your first draft doesn't have to be perfect. And so maybe just free yourself up and lower the standards and allow yourself to write bad at first, because there's going to be, some good nuggets in there that come out. And what's nice about it, especially if you don't have deadlines, is it's almost like playing a volleyball tournament where you pick the date. You can practice as long as you want, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're gonna have to play the tournament, but you can keep revising and working. And I think if you just like plug away, that's how it gets better. And it's really inspiring to be like, hey, I worked on this, you know, an hour a morning, and all of a sudden at the end of the year, I have this 450-page book that I've done a couple of drafts of, and it adds up. You're just pounding at the stone, and eventually it cracks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Last couple questions I have for you, Billy. Just talk a little bit about legacy and fulfillment. Part of writing a book is that you'll always have this, right? And, like,
Mm.
that's I always admired that with writers and even actors. People in the recording arts, to leave this legacy. In sports, it's I just feel like it's a little bit challenging. I mean, if you win, it's great. Hey, you got trophies, you got banners, you got championships. But it's tough, when you know to leave a legacy, um, and to create fulfillment in your life when you don't win all the time. Could you talk a little bit about fulfillment and legacy for yourself?
Yeah, I would say there's a good and a scary and exciting thing about like writing a book and the legacy it leaves. One is you're forever locked into what you said, like, right. And so especially like a nonfiction book like you're writing, or like Coach Your Brains Out, it's like, I'm sure we got stuff wrong, I'm sure stuff changes, I'm sure if we wrote the book 5 years later we would have been like, I would have like added this. And so as far as that, like, some of it's scary, but at some point, um you just have to do the best you can at the moment. Um, though, is that it's through the book. Like, we've touched so many more people than I ever would have thought. We get we get emails, especially John, because he's more plugged into the coaching world. We get emails from coaches that have read the book or that love it or that learn one thing from the podcast all the time. And it's just really inspiring that the work you're doing isn't in this vacuum, but it's escaping out and leaking into the wider world and maybe, making somebody or some team somewhere just that much better. And that's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Billy, wow, this was a lot of fun. I'm so glad we got to do this. Kind of a cool full circle moment too, for me. Just growing up, kind of watching you play and playing against you, and
Mhm.
Santa Monica Pier stuff and matzo ball stuff. But I just really appreciate you coming on and spending some time and sharing some of your mindset with me and my audience. Thank you very much.
No, Aaron, thanks for what you do. It's really cool that, yeah, we're both pursuing the similar things with the podcast and the book writing. And best of luck with the book. And yeah, I hope you get your message out. And I hope you just keep getting better and inspiring people.
Cool, man. Thank you so much. Before we sign off, just tell people how they can find you and again where they can get books and podcasts and all that stuff.
Yeah, I have a website again called Billy Ketch Allen. It's my middle name. It's Ketch. And then that's my tag for Instagram and stuff like that. I don't post a lot on Instagram and Twitter, but you can reach out for sure. And then yeah, check out a book on Amazon if you're interested in the fantasy stuff, or for sure Coach Your Brains Out. That sells way more copies than my fantasy stuff. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're ever out at an AVP event, come say hi.
Awesome. Billy Allen, you're the man. Appreciate you, bro. Let's do a part 2 sometime too.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, bro.
See ya.
Bye. This episode is brought to you by DAF Global. If you're looking to start a podcast or you have a podcast and you're looking for editing services, hit up my guys Oliver and Garrett at DAF Global. They're awesome. They help me with this podcast and they take care of all kinds of different services like editing and audio enhancement, and they're great to work with. They're also offering a 10% discount to all Within the Game listeners. So hit my guys up at DAF Global on Instagram and also on their website, www.dafglobal.co.uk.